The mining colony on Epsilon 7 wasn't supposed to have children. The regulations were clear. No families, no dependents, only contracted workers extracting rare minerals from the frozen wasteland. But Louis Harper was there anyway, a 5-year-old anomaly with bright blue eyes and an ever-present smile, brought by his mother after a bureaucratic mix-up, left them with nowhere else to go. The colony administrator, Lila Chen, had argued against allowing them to stay. At 28, she was the youngest person ever to run a frontier outpost, and she'd earned that position through rigid adherence to protocol. Children complicated everything: resource allocation, safety protocols, educational requirements. But when she'd looked into the desperate eyes of Louis's mother, a widow with no other options, something in her carefully constructed armor had cracked. Temporary, Lila had said, stamping the approval form with more force than necessary. 3 months maximum. That had been 2 months ago. Now, as Lila reviewed supply manifests in her cramped office, an alarm pierced the thin air. Not the bone-rattling emergency klaxon, but the perimeter alert. Something had breached the outer fence. She grabbed her thermal coat and headed for the airlock, arriving just as the security team dragged 2 figures through the inner door. Not human figures. The creatures were small, perhaps a meter tall, with elongated limbs and skin that shimmered between silver and blue. Their large eyes, too large for their faces, blinked rapidly in the harsh artificial light. "Scary," breathed Jenkins, the head of security. "I thought they were extinct." Lila had read about them in the colonial briefings. The Scari had once inhabited Epsilon 7's southern continent before the ice age that transformed the planet had wiped them out. Or so everyone had believed. "Get them to medical," Lila ordered. But as the security team moved forward, both aliens collapsed. Their bodies were covered in frost, their breathing shallow. They were children, she realized. Children, and they were dying. The next hours blurred together. The medical bay wasn't equipped for xenobiology, but Dr. Okonkwo did what he could. The young Scari, twins he determined, were suffering from severe hypothermia. Their species had evolved for Epsilon 7's climate before the change, and they simply couldn't survive the current temperatures. "We need to raise their core temperature gradually," Okonkwo explained. "But our thermal blankets are designed for human physiology. The electromagnetic frequency is wrong. It's actually making them colder." Lila stared at the readouts, her mind racing through options. They could jury-rig something, maybe recalibrate the blankets, but that would take hours. Hours the twins didn't have. A small sound made her turn. Louis stood in the medical bay doorway, clutching his blanket. A worn, threadbare thing covered in faded spaceships that his grandmother had made before she died. He'd carried it everywhere since arriving at the colony. "They're cold," Louis said simply. "Louis, you shouldn't be here," Lila began, but the boy was already moving forward, his small feet padding across the metal floor. "When I'm cold, my blanket makes me warm," he said, and before anyone could stop him, he'd climbed onto the medical table and spread his blanket over the 2 shivering aliens. "Louis, no!" Lila reached for him, but Okonkwo caught her arm. "Wait," the doctor whispered, eyes fixed on his instruments. Look, the readings were changing. The Scari twins' vital signs were stabilizing, their breathing becoming more regular. The simple cloth blanket, warmed by years of human contact and love, was doing what advanced technology couldn't. But Louis wasn't done. He lay down next to the aliens, pressing his small, warm body against their cold forms, sharing his heat in the most fundamental way possible. "Louis, you'll freeze," Lila protested, but even as she spoke, she was removing her own coat, draping it over the boy. She looked around the medical bay. Every human present, security officers, technicians, medical staff, was removing their outer layers, piling them onto the table. Within minutes, the 3 children were buried in a mountain of human warmth. The Scari twins survived the night. By morning, they were conscious, their large eyes tracking the movements of the humans who'd saved them. Louis sat between them, chattering away in a language they couldn't possibly understand, sharing his breakfast rations without hesitation. Through the translators they managed to cobble together, Lila learned the truth. The Scari weren't extinct. A small population had survived in deep underground caverns, slowly adapting to the new climate. These twins had wandered too far from their home, gotten lost in a storm, and stumbled upon the human colony by pure chance. "We thought we were alone," the Scari elder transmitted when they arrived to retrieve the children a week later. We thought all the warm-blooded species had abandoned this world. We're still learning about this world, Lila replied carefully. We didn't know you were here. The elder's crystalline eyes focused on Louis, who was saying goodbye to his new friends with promises to visit and gifts of hand-drawn pictures. Your species is strange. Your child gave away his most precious possession to those he'd never met. That's what humans do, Lila found herself saying, surprising herself with the pride in her voice. Especially our children. They haven't learned to see differences as barriers. The elder was silent for a long moment. Then, we have watched your mining operations. We assumed you were here to strip our world as others have, but perhaps we were wrong. What came next changed everything. The Skari knew Epsilon 7 in ways the humans never could. Every mineral vein, every safe passage through the ice storms, every secret the frozen planet held. They offered partnership, cooperation, knowledge in exchange for the warmth humanity could provide through technology and simple compassion. Lila stood at her office window months later, watching as human and Skari children played together in the newly constructed heated dome. Louis was in the center of it all, his blanket still clutched in one hand while the other held fast to his Skari friends. The regulations had changed. Families were now encouraged at Epsilon 7. Children, it turned out, weren't complications. They were humanity's greatest ambassadors, and it had all started with a 5-year-old boy who understood something the adults had forgotten. Sometimes the most advanced technology is simple kindness, and the warmest gesture is an outstretched hand, or in this case, a worn blanket given freely in the cold dark of space.